Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge program. The Fatherhood Challenge is a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability of an environment and culture. We're going to encourage and challenge each other to step up and do courageous things that make our families and communities better places. So let's get to it. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, it's always good to have you with me. Today, we're dealing with a really interesting subject, a very sensitive one for many fathers. And the research shows it's more fathers than we realize. And that's exactly why we are doing this episode. And this episode has to do with fathers who are dealing with sons that have chronic addictions. In this case, we are touching specifically on the fentanyl addiction. And with me, I have my guest. His name is Robert Bradbury. And I have known him since at least high school. So we've known each other for many, many years. And we touched base recently and kind of got caught up again. And it was great to hear from him. But the circumstances in which that happened were very, very difficult ones. And that's why we're here to share this story. Please, when at the end of this episode, I would appreciate it if you would share the story with as many fathers as you know that need to hear this. This is a very important story, a very serious message, and this is a true story.
Jonathan, thank you for having me on.
It is a privilege and an honor to have you on, and I'm grateful that you're willing to come here and tell your story. Let's start with a little bit with the family history. So tell me a little bit about what it was like for you, just starting from the birth of your sons. What was the experience there?
Well, Robbie's birth was not traumatic. It was a scheduled C-section with no complications. When we started seeing complications with him was when he was an infant and he was being bottle fed. His mother wasn't able to lactate enough, so we had to use formula. We ran into issues with him being very colic. So we spent quite a bit of time trying new formulas and finding ones that worked. I started seeing some red flags with his mother right from the beginning, because I would come home from work, find him in his car seat, and a little pillow on him, his chest, propping up the bottle. So that started giving me some red flags there. Most mothers would go ahead, especially first-time mother, hold their child and want to feed them. There's a mother-child connection. Well, not more than 7 months after he was born, we separated. She decided she wanted to go see other men, and I felt that wasn't acceptable in a brand new marriage. So we separated. I moved back home, back to Keene. She moved in with her parents, taking my son with him. Unfortunately, way state of Texas works. Mother has all the rights. Fathers come second. But I was young. I was 22 at the time, so I didn't know better. By the time my son was 18 months old, his mother, abandoned him, left him there to be cared for by her mother and father. She decided it was more important to chase men and drugs at that point in her life. Now, knowing any prior of her history, we don't know, because she was adopted. Only thing we knew is her trying to search down any biological relatives. Only information we could gather was they were all deceased and they all had drug problems. So that's the only history we had from her. Now, she went on to have a second son with another man, but did the same pattern of abandonment and being absent parent to her, second son. Now, time Robbie was 9 years old, I was able to get his mother to sign over the paperwork to allow me to be custodial and her the non-custodial rights. So that allows me, to be the one that he would live with. It cost me some money, but with her being a drug addict, I exploited a loophole in order to get my son. I was planning on doing a slow transition over, with the grandparents. But at that time, the grandmother had a major heart attack. So I went ahead and executed that. Felt that was the best reason, you know, but this ended up causing a lot of drama between the families and ended up getting lawyers involved, but we were able to negotiate this. Pretty much the grandmother assumed the mother's rights, because since the mother's been absentee. Now with this, it's at that time, that's when we started seeing behavior changes in my son. Before that, we would have issues where he wouldn't want to come over on the weekends, and I think a lot of that had to do with the grandmother's interaction with him, because it was a very inappropriate relationship where she was emotionally dumping on him and would say things, "Oh, I'm going to miss you till you come back." Things that they would say they tell you not to say in a co-parenting class, because you don't want to put guilt onto the child. Then the child feels the guilt. Well, I shouldn't go to the other parent because this parent feels so bad, and totally inappropriate. I wish I really could have gone through to her on that one, but it made life a lot difficult. So that's when we started seeing his behavior patterns change from ADHD to now being upset. He was mad at me. He started really acting out. He was breaking property. He was lying to us. He started hurting animals. All these things were denied as accidents at first. Oh, it was an accident. Oh, your cell phone accidentally fell in the fish aquarium. Really? So that's when the pattern started happening. And as it progressively got worse, we ended up having to take action when he told a therapist, "Oh, I feel like I'm going to kill myself." So at that time, I have no choice but to admit him into a Cook's Children's program. And, that's a children's hospital over here. It took multiple hospitalizations and multiple testing for him to get the diagnosis of ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. He had the ADHD diagnosed before, and he actually did show improvement with medicine with it. But I do feel ADHD is one of the ones that are overly diagnosed these days. Oh, teacher can't do their job. Here, your kids needs pills. But anyway, sorry to digress on that. As his behaviors got worse, we started seeing him even developing even greater alarming patterns. We went from hurting animals to actually killing animals. And that's when we tried to seek out help for him and look at resident care facilities. Because we only had him on state insurance, there was a limited amount of resource we could get. And the ones that would be willing to take him, as soon as we told him about harming animals and killing them, they didn't want anything to do with him. We heard the same excuses over and over again. Either, number one, let me back up. He's a obese, very big child. His mother is 6'2". I'm 6 foot. So he was genetically going to be a very tall person. And on top of that, he was an emotional eater. And so he was a big boy. But the other issue they would solve was they felt, him hurting animals was more harmful, would put the other patients at harm's way. So they were more
Now
thinking
the
about,
ODD part of that is what we're talking about here, correct? These symptoms that we're describing, these
yeah,
are the symptoms of an ODD.
yeah, oppositional defiance disorder.
Okay.
I, there's another issue that parents may see that they go hand in hand, which is conduct disorder. And to be honest, he falls under the category of conduct disorder. And I've never seen this until I was preparing my notes for this program. And conduct disorder, directly saying property theft, damage, aggression towards people and animals. And it frustrates me that why didn't these professionals even tell me this? I mean, my gut's telling me he's hurting animals. Every show you see about, serial killers, oh, they start off hurting animals. So my gut's telling me I got to do something about this child.
Why do you think
Get
they
him.
missed that diagnosis?
I don't know, for the IMDb, whether it's new or whether they just didn't want to address it. But the ODD is just to explain that to the other parents. That's where you're fighting against rules. Yeah, people of authority, parents, teachers. Best way to describe it is, say, if it's more common with, a daughter acting out, willing to tell you off. That's a good way of ODD, but not this actual violence per se. And that's what conduct disorder is.
There's another episode that's being planned where I will be talking with an expert on those subjects to kind of clarify some of those differences and talking about um, different options to deal with those signs when they're spotted and also how to avoid them. So that will be a completely different episode. But it sounds to me like if I'm understanding this correctly, where all of these symptoms, where everything that we're talking about so far, it originated from abandonment, a history of chronic abandonment. Does that sound right to you?
That's absolutely correct. With the mother, I think the abandonment issue actually started with the mother herself. She was adopted at age 13, and her history, what was said was, it's very vague, but somehow the her actual biological mother couldn't take care of her, so she was relinquished over to the biological mother's uncle or our brother. So it would have been her uncle, for care. But he was a trucker and didn't feel that was a lifestyle for her. And that's when he relinquished her over to the state. So right there we have, inability to form attachments.
Where did this lead from here? So now we have this family history of abandonment, and now we have him acting out later in years with ODD, but at least that's the diagnosis. And then, but the behavior is really like a CD behavior. Where does this go from here?
It didn't leave me much room as a parent to try get treatment for him other than address the issue and try treat the issue at the time. So as time went on, all I could do is try keep him under surveillance. I didn't have cameras, but keep animals away from him. Just under constant monitor. Plus, we've kept him into therapy sessions, and also pharmacology treatments as well. So so he was under medication. Medication itself doesn't help. It can help alleviate some of the symptoms. Therapy sessions, I didn't feel they were very helpful. I had to do those in order to try to provide the best care I can for my child. But unfortunately, unless a person wants to change, it doesn't mean anything. With one thing I've learned and through watching my son go through these different treatment programs and speaking with other parents that have gone through similar circumstances of their kids having to go through multiple treatment programs. These kids are smart. They learn real quickly how to manipulate the system, say what they need to say in order to either be admitted or get back out of the system. I had a couple times, my son try to pull the stunts because he just didn't want to go to school. Oh, I feel like I'm gonna kill myself, or tell somebody of authority who's a licensed, you know, individual, and so now I'm forced to act upon this, or else I can be reported to Child Protective Service if I don't act upon it and get my son, you know, the necessary help he needs. So it really twists my arm there. As we got, into high school, he pretty much lost half of his freshman year from acting out. So the rest of the time of high school, he never had any problems at school itself, with confrontation with people or anything of that nature that would have been alarming that you would maybe see with other kids. No bullying. What we ran into was the issues were at home. Um, he didn't have any friends outside of school other than online through his game, through the games console. So he was very socially withdrawn that way. I mean, I immediately see that as a sign of depression. So we kept trying to treat that. I really wanted him to have a normal high school experience, go on school functions, have friends outside of school. Trying to push him to do that, nothing would work. Um, so he kept withdrawn. Then we started getting more behavioral issues into him soiling himself. And disgusting as it sounds, I won't go into details of that. Through this huge journey, I believe that one was actually a control issue. This is my body. I could control my functions. This is my way of controlling. I've kept him in therapy till 2016. At that time, I went through a split with my second wife, and I was working second shift, which is from 2 p.m. to like 10 p.m. So I wasn't home in the evenings. I was trying to remotely help parent him while he was still living with me, but he was pretty much taking care of himself in the evenings. But at age 16, it's like there's enough that he can be independent. And so I was trying to give him ways to help develop himself. But a week prior to, or let me jump back. In 2016, he decided to try to commit suicide by overdosing on Adderall medicine that I take. And a week prior to that, I just put a new router in place at home and set it to cut off the internet at 10 o'clock at night, a reasonable time, because he was staying up late. His grades weren't looking good. And that was the only way I can remotely parent. But there was no major filtering on anything, just trying to be a parent, a single parent at that time. But from the moment he tried to commit suicide, I no longer could take care of him because I felt he needed to be now under constant supervision. He went to go live with my brother, and he did really good there. He lived in a converted shed, one of these prefab all wood sheds that was made into his bedroom, had AC unit, the internet. Did good there for 2 years or 3 years. Finished high school out, got that done. Went through a semester of college. Then the second semester rolls around. He decided to drop out of college and lie about it, causing drama, and ended up having to go live with my other brother, and they moved to his shed there. He stayed there for about 9 months, but at that point he started to dive into drugs. Prior to that, I learned, he was, smoking weed and was okay with that, but, wasn't out of control. But when he moved again, that's when he dived out of control and started taking hallucinogens. He ended up taking a lot of a hallucinogen. It's not LSD. It was some other one that's on the market. I can't think of it at the moment. But it was designed in a lab, and it was designed actually to give you a bad trip so they could watch your brain on one of these PET scans. But it escaped the labs, and it's dirt cheap on the drug market, and they'll sell it as LSD, but it's like half the cost. Anyway, he when he was tripping on this, managed to stumble his way down to my parents' house, get very aggressive while he was tripping out, attacked my mother, and broke her kneecap. Since that point forward, she's been disabled. He ended up having to get arrested, spent 2 nights in jail. After that, his drug habit got worse. He started diving into opiates. I know he had to been Narcan multiple times, at least 6 times before he's passed away from fentanyl overdose. I have friends on the Keene Fire Department, and they couldn't tell me exactly, you know, they had to Narcan him because of HIPAA laws, but what they could say was code is, hey, I saw your son at the store yesterday. So that told me, okay, there was an incident. We started, really getting onto him after he went to jail, telling him, no, you stop doing these drugs. You don't need it, and we kept an eye on him. That's when he decided to move out into his own apartment with a druggy roommate. And from that point on, there was no control.
So during that time, was his primary drug fentanyl, or was he doing some other drugs with that?
We don't know exactly. He would say it was Xanax or bars, but these are all drugs that are counterfeited and, pressed with fentanyl. We saw, his behaviors where he was really slurring speech, sleeping a lot. We had a couple, him wrecking his car a few times. Nobody was hurt, but it was clear that he was driving under the influence. One of the times, he actually landed his car in the ditch 90 degrees up on its side. And that's when we really got onto him. It's like, no, you got to quit this. You're going to kill yourself. We didn't know we were dealing with fentanyl laced drugs, or I mean, he was taking it. In fact, the only way we knew about him taking fentanyl was post the fact of him dying.
According to what's the DEA says about fentanyl, it's 80 to 100 times stronger than morphine, and the symptoms. And you said something to this fact as well. They resemble other opioid drugs as well, and it produces effects like relaxation, euphoria, pain relief, sedation, confusion, drowsiness, dizziness. A few others would be respiratory, depression. So, any of those symptoms that I just mentioned, does it seem at all like those symptoms were an attempt to mask some other pain going on inside him, whether it's an emotional pain? And what part of those symptoms you think were trying to mask what pain?
I think he was, you know, trying to suppress his emotional pain of abandonment and for me taking him away from his grandmother. But also on the other side, he was, it'd be the euphoria, you know, and relaxation because he was still smoking weed. And so I think he was trying to take it to the next level. He's been, with him having ODD, he was always reactive and never, stop and let me think about my consequences. It was always just jump into what he wants, and that was it. The more I learn about this fentanyl, the more it scares me. According to the DEA, a lethal dose is 2.5 milligrams. That's enough powder to fit on the lead point of a sharpened pencil. And these, drug dealers are just pressing these pills like crazy. I mean, you can go on Alibaba and buy the templates for these tablets. It's that accessible. According to some of the news reports I read, China is shipping in these fentanyl. These drug rings do not care about your kid. All they care about is their bottom dollar. If your kid dies, oh well, there'll be some other, kid come along and they will sell pills to. I mean, they just up in around the Great Lakes, there was a huge bust for fentanyl where they seized 1,200 kilograms of it. But that's enough to kill 3 million people. It's that toxic.
That's crazy. That's actually pretty scary. Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the signs a father should be looking for that should send up red flags that his son or daughter might be doing fentanyl?
Or just any drugs. I would start looking for changes of patterns. Has their behavior changed? What is there something they used to do and they love to do, no longer care to do it? Has their friends changed? Who they're hanging out with? Is this a different crowd? What are their spending patterns? Drugs aren't cheap. And so they're going to be having to spend, get money for this one way or another. Are they stealing from you? Do they actually have money? So what I suggest to any parent is trust your gut. If something seems off, investigate it. Is there a foul smell coming from your kid's room? Are you smelling burning plastic? Or are you smelling weed? Investigate it. If your child is living under your roof, nothing is off limits. You have every right you can to go through their stuff, because it's your duty as a parent to make sure you're doing what you can to raise your child and keep them safe. And if this means violating personal space to keep them alive, do it.
Robert, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's been very meaningful and very impacting. And I know there's a lot more to come. For the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here, and we're going to continue the rest of the story in the next episode. Thank you.